It's said that history often repeats itself. The first time is tragedy, the second is farce. Many Britons feel they are living through both at the same time as their country navigates its way out of the European Union. The British government awarded a contract to ship in emergency supplies to a company with no ships. It pledged to replace citizens' burgundy European passports with proudly British blue ones, and gave the contract to a Franco-Dutch company. It promised to forge trade deals with 73 countries by the end of March, but has only a handful in place, including one with the Faroe Islands. Pretty much everyone in the UK agrees that the Conservative government's handling of Brexit has been disastrous. Unfortunately, that's about the only thing this divided nation can agree on. Britain due to leave the EU in 6 weeks and still no deal in sight on the terms of its departure. Both supporters and opponents of Brexit are in a state of high anxiety. Pro-EU Remainers lament the looming end of Britain's right to live and work in 27 other European nations and fear the UK is about to crash out of the bloc without even a divorce deal to cushion the blow. Brexiteers worry that their dream of leaving the EU will be dashed by bureaucratic shenanigans that will delay its departure or keep Britain bound to EU regulations forever. It has been more than 2.5 years since Britons voted 52% to 48% to leave the EU. Then came many months of tense negotiations to settle on Brexit departure terms and the outline of future relations. At last, the EU and Prime Minister Theresa May's government struck a deal, then saw it resoundingly rejected last month by Britain's parliament, which, like the rest of the country, has split into pro-Brexit and pro-EU camps. May is now seeking changes to the Brexit deal in the hope of getting it through Parliament before March 29. EU leaders say they won't renegotiate, and accuse Britain of failing to offer a way out of the impasse. May insists she won't ask the EU to delay Britain's departure, and has refused to rule out a cliff-edge no-deal Brexit. Meanwhile, Brexit has clogged the gears of Britain's economic and political life. The economy has stalled, growing by only 0.2% in the fourth quarter as business investment registered a fourth straight quarterly decline. Big political decisions have been postponed, as May's minority, Conservative government struggles to get bills through a squabbling and divided parliament. Major legislation needed to prepare for Brexit has yet to be approved. Britain still does not have a deal on future trade with the EU, and it's unclear what tariffs or other barriers British firms that do business with Europe will face after March 29. That has left businesses and citizens in an agonizing limbo. Rod McKenzie, director of policy at the Road Haulage Association, a truckers' lobby group, feels pure anger at a government he says has failed to plan, leaving haulers uncertain whether they will be able to travel to EU countries after March 29. McKenzie says truckers were told they will need Europe-issued permits to drive through EU countries if Britain leaves the bloc without a deal. Of more than 11,000 who applied, only 984, less than 10%, have been granted the papers. It's been an absolutely disastrous process for our industry, which keeps Britain supplied with, essentially, everything. Still, some Brexit backers, such as former Daily Telegraph editor Charles Moore, relish the prospect of a clean break even if it brings short-term pain. Perhaps it is time for a Brexit recipe book, like those comforting wartime rationing ones full of bright ideas for dull things, Moore wrote in The Spectator, a conservative magazine. He added that he and his neighbors were willing to set out in our little ships to Dunkirk or wherever and bring back luscious black market lettuces and French beans, oranges and lemons. Brexit supporters often turn to nostalgic evocations of World War II and Britain's finest hour, to the annoyance of pro-Europeans. The imagery reached a peak of absurdity during a recent BBC News report on Brexit, when the anchor announced May said she intended to go back to Brussels to renegotiate her Brexit deal, as the screen cut to black and white footage of World War II British Spitfires going into battle. The BBC said the startling juxtaposition was a mistake. The footage was intended for an item about a new Battle of Britain museum. Skeptics cite as evidence of the broadcaster's bias, though they disagreed on whether it was in favour of Brexit or against it. Some pro-Europeans have hit back against Brexit with despairing humour. Four friends have started plastering billboards in London with 6-metre by 3-metre images of pro-Brexit politicians' past tweets, to expose what the group sees as their hypocrisy. Highlights include former UK Independence Party leader Nigel Farage's vow that, if Brexit is a disaster, I will go and live abroad, and ex-Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson's pledge to make a Titanic success of Brexit. The Friends dubbed the campaign, led by donkeys, after the description of British soldiers in World War I as lions led by donks. The billboards are now going nationwide, after a crowdfunding campaign raised almost $150,270,000. A similar feeling of alienation reigns across the Brexit divide in the Leave camp. After the referendum, Harris, a 28-year-old classically trained singer, founded a group called Leavers of London so Brexiteers could socialise without facing opprobrium from neighbours and colleagues who don't share their views. It has grown into Leavers of Britain, with branches across the country. Harris thinks Britain's EU divide is as wide as it ever was. There can't be reconciliation until Brexit is done, she said. Whenever that is.